Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Monday, December 9th, 2019, and you have reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film discussion show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is episode 58.2, one of our indie spotlights, and as throughout all 2019, this is our fifth season, we're looking back at indies from 10 years ago, 2009, and tonight is the documentary indie More Than a Game about the high school career of NBA superstar LeBron James. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler, one of your hosts here this evening, and I am in the apartment of the fellow society member, George, as I've been on several of the last couple shows because he's on hiatus doing a play in Nantucket, of all places. And speaking of society members, I'm going to introduce you to my all-stars that are with me tonight. First, a superstar, one of the great young film reviewers in the world, Ryan Turner is here with us, ladies and gentlemen.
How's it going?
Ryan, you're in a different place. You got a whole new location happening.
Yeah, I'm still figuring it out.
My other co-host this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is a redheaded father figure who found a second leaf on life through this show. James Monahan is here.
Wow, a second leaf on life.
Yeah, this show gives you purpose.
Thanks. Yeah, but I thought it was having a child because you mentioned I'm a father figure, and that's literal now. I just had a child.
Just a few months ago.
I think it's going to be too short to play basketball. He is a ping pong player already. Here's a picture of him in his ping pong onesie.
There's no doubt whose child that is with that head of hair.
Like father, like son.
All right, so those are our hosts for this evening, and here is our schedule for our 58th series of episodes. It started this past Thursday, December the 5th, with a review of the film Queen and Slim. Of course, tonight is the Indie Spotlight, More Than a Game. This upcoming Thursday is our classic movie discussion of the 1973 baseball movie, Bang the Drum Slowly. And next Monday, we're going to have Ryan back along with Devin, and we're going to have a sound off. And on every Indie Spotlight, I do trivia at the end of an episode. And on the last Indie Spotlight, in which we reviewed the film Two Lovers, I said that our next Indie would be about a basketball star goes indie in another documentary review. And of course, that basketball star is LeBron James, a three-time NBA champion, four-time NBA MVP, possibly one of the greatest players of all time. He was drafted first overall out of high school in 2003. Incidentally, drafting players out of high school was disallowed after the 2005 draft. And this film looks a little bit at LeBron in high school and the fervor around his amateur career. That was the trivia tidbit. Are you guys ready for the summary and so we can dig into this documentary?
Get your shovel.
Yeah.
Dig in.
All right, dig in, the man says. Okay. More Than a Game. Four inner-city young men in Akron, Ohio find a bond on and off the basketball court. But it's their game-time chemistry that opens some doors for them and puts them in the national spotlight, which has as many negative impacts as it does positive. And, of course, one of these four young men is LeBron James. Now, with indies, we do things a little differently. One of us has to recommend the indie, and then the others have to watch it and respond. And this is my recommendation. I find it to be an exciting and emotional movie, not just about LeBron James, but about the team that made LeBron possible. So my question to you guys is, before we do opening thoughts, is have you seen or heard of the film before having to watch it for tonight's episode?
I had not seen it. I had not actually heard of it, actually. I had heard of LeBron James. Give me
That's
something.
That's for you especially. That's something. Ryan, had you heard about this film before having to watch it, or had you seen it before when it first came out?
I think someone had told me about it at one point, but I hadn't watched it.
Ryan, you get to go first with the opening thoughts. One sentence to describe how you felt about the film.
I guess enlightening, or a great look behind the now almost impenetrable image of LeBron, I guess.
That sounds positive. James, what about you? Opening thoughts, one sentence.
I thought it was a feel-good, positive film featuring so much detail and footage that it kept you entertained.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I was going with it. Now normally before we discuss docs, and this is James's second doc that he's discussed this season. We did a film called Every Little Step early in the year. Many times on these docs, I think the reviews for documentaries are different in the sense that I feel like they're more about form than content. And for me in this particular case, what makes this film work is its structure. And I also, as we go talk about this, I want to remind people that this film came out in 2009, which was before the Warriors, Cavaliers. It was before any NBA titles for LeBron, before the decision. LeBron was obviously the best player in the league, but the legend had not fully been formed at the time of this film. It may not still fully be formed, as he still may have 2 or 3 years left in the NBA, currently out his final years in Los Angeles. So the thing that struck me first, and James sort of alluded to this, is the storytelling of the film and the structure was very much to me like a traditional narrative in a lot of ways, with an arc, several character arcs actually, but the main one being the arc of the team itself and how they grew together over the 5 or so years that they were a group. As it told a story, the film used asides in a very effective way, surprisingly effective. In other words, as it told its story of the time, it would take a pause and fill in character details on one subject or another, whether it was about Sean's football career or LeBron's backstory, which didn't come until late in the film. On paper, I might worry about that this would interfere with the momentum of the film, but I think it was successful in 2 ways. First, it spread out the exposition of the film so that it didn't feel like too much too soon, and it didn't get dumped on us all at once. It also, to me, made it more interesting to learn certain things after the fact, sort of like peeling away at the onion, answering some of the questions as they went along. These asides were short enough that they didn't interfere with the momentum, so I think it was a ballsy choice that worked out well. And the other thing I liked about it, James, is I like the way they cut the game footage with the interviews, like good storytelling does. It added context and tension simultaneously. What do you guys feel about my comments on storytelling?
Yeah, I definitely feel like it did a good job of kind of dangling the carrot, like kind of giving us like tastes of what's to come, but also being very strategic of when it dived into each character's story. Like it gave us a sense of who they were when they're being interviewed, but then it used narrative moments to motivate why we dig deeper. The football game on why Sean, we'd go deeper into his story, or like a big 3-point winner for why we went into the sun. In the beginning, it took me a little bit longer to get my bearings because they kept saying senior year, and they kept going to this future period being like senior year this time. I didn't have enough feet on the ground to really understand that was a flash forward.
You're right. And when preparing for tonight, and I have some quibbles coming up later, and I forgot to include that. That's a great quibble. I mean, I knew it was senior year. Like they would jump for like less than a minute,
one shot,
and then back to the traditional narrative, the more sequential narrative of the story. But I had almost blocked them out. Like they weren't enough to really like land as a structural choice. But they weren't enough also to like bring it that far down for me. I completely forgot about them. But James.
Yeah, I agree. When you're jumping around in time, you got to be clear about it. And yeah, I agree. It wasn't as clear as it could have been here and there. But you're talking about narrative and tension. A solid choice when making a documentary is to cover something that has a definite end. On top of that, a competition always works. We already talked about Every Little Step, which involved the competition of auditioning for Chorus Line on Broadway. Mm-hmm. So obviously here with sports, it's a great subject for any documentary, especially when there's this final game we're leading up to, and we want to know who wins. So you have automatic tension built in. It was an ambitious film. They gave themselves an ambitious task to tell the story of this team, but also tell the story of these characters, the Fab Four, which became the Fab Five by the end of the film. That's a lot to try to do in just a feature.
For sure. They accomplished that much too. And that's a segue to, I think, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which was the character development within the structure. I mean, I think I like that the film wasn't just about LeBron James, and they very easily could have fallen into that trap. I mean, I think each of the other members of the self-dub, as James said, new Fab Five, get a lot of screen time, and they all get their stories told. Even the story of the eventual coach of the team, who's also the father of one of the 5, has a lot of heart and emotional impact. And it showed for me how the paths of 6 different people converged at a certain place and a certain time to create sports history, and mostly severely positive impact the lives of not just these 6, but dozens of people. For example, their first high school coach, Keith Dambrot, got a college gig at the University of Akron where he would become the winningest coach in their history. He's currently the head coach of Duquesne. Brian Windhorst, who was also interviewed in the film, was a local beat writer for an Akron newspaper who was eventually hired by ESPN mainly because he got to cover LeBron and this team. So many lives were touched on the periphery of this team. These lives were affected by the rise and success of this team, and of course, by James himself. Guys, the character development in this film.
The one character that stands out in this film for me, or the one relationship, is Drew Joyce III and his father, the coach. It's worthy of a scripted drama. It has a great character hook. He is a great basketball player, but he's super short, ironically short for how good he is. And then you have this really intriguing relationship where he's playing on the team coached by his own dad. And so you have that tension. I thought they did a great job of telling that story. I think other members of the Fab Four or Fab Five weren't covered in it as an exciting fashion as they could have been, but they didn't have as much narrative potential as Drew Joyce III.
Drew Joyce's success in the championship game, when he's raining three-pointers, for me was an emotional highlight of the film. Very impactful, and for short people like Ryan, I imagine it had extra impact.
Not that short. I personally felt that the coach character, was probably one of the strongest. Just seeing him step up, going from losing that middle school game as a coach to like really becoming a father figure to all of these kids. I kind of researched a little bit after that his son went to play professionally. It did really well. He's like a legend at his current team.
In Germany, yeah.
Yeah.
He and Romeo played for Akron, for their old high school coach.
Yeah. They clearly had such a time crunch to get everything in, and they had to be strategic. Most people watching this doc are more interested in LeBron, and I think that they'll be happy for people that are LeBron fans to find out more about his life, and especially his relationship with his mother. It was really interesting for me the way that he mentioned his father, because he was basically just like, my mom is my mom and my dad. Every character grew in a different way. The team obviously was like you're saying, one of the main characters in terms of growing and growth. And it was interesting because I'm sure like there's a lot of stuff in LeBron's own career that probably ended up coming back from this doc. The way that the teams implode or something, like he definitely faced that a few times.
I don't want to get into it too much with James. I do disagree. I felt like the other players, I got enough. Like, I felt like I understood them as characters. I wasn't left wanting. Like, I got their basic storylines and plot lines enough for them to have arcs, and how Sean grew as a basketball player, and Willie's relationship with his brother who took care of him from a certain age. And also how Romeo became a member of the group, and his arc to being the angry young man to not being. I don't think we're too far apart on it, because I see your point. Like, the Joyces had more screen time for sure. But I mean, like, you insinuated that there wasn't enough of the others, and for me, I feel like there was just enough. I got it. I felt satisfied by it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, in any ensemble story, when you're dealing with an ensemble of characters, you can't cover everyone equally. Not all of them can be the point of view character. Even an ensemble show, you usually latch on to one character. So yeah, you can't do everything. I just thought there were certain characters, I think Drew Joyce and his dad and LeBron, who were just more interesting to me.
They are just genuinely probably just more interesting.
Yeah, obviously certain storylines are stronger. I think they did have enough nuggets of other things to keep the other characters interesting too. So that way, when the big payoff happens, I felt even the minor characters, like the side characters of the five, I felt their success. I felt cathartic for what they were going through too, and what they sacrificed to be there.
So I do have some quibbles with the film, minor stuff that is just worth mentioning, because I do like the film very much, obviously. And one has to do with LeBron himself, who does appear in the film and is interviewed, which he didn't have to do, and they probably could have gotten away with making the film without it. But I would say that being the media master that he is, LeBron was disappointingly quiet on certain issues. He was willing to talk about some not so great things, like certain losses in his life. His mother wasn't a great thing, but his family life he was willing to talk about. He was willing to talk about the friendships. He was very unwilling to talk directly, and I know this because when I saw the film in January 2010, the director came in and he was unwilling to talk directly about some of the scandals that affected his senior year. And I would have liked some reflection on those things. I certainly disagree with the scandals, if you will, that he went through, and I thought he handled them then fairly well. But he was only 6 years older by the time this film was made, but I would have been interested to see how he would have talked about those. That was interesting, but also disappointing. So that was one of my quibbles. I don't know if you guys even cared about that.
That was one of my things too. Yeah, it was just this kind of like radio silence during this really controversial time, specifically the sponsorships and the things. And he would kind of either joke it off, but it was like, no, there's clearly something else going on here. Like, you're coming in with all these, like, what about the car? You didn't really talk about the car.
Well, I mean, like, and yeah, specifically in the modern day interview, modern day being 10 years ago now, but he wasn't asked, he didn't talk, like, it wasn't a thing.
It was a big plot point in the movie, and it just kind of felt like, I think it was a little confusing to me. I needed that clarification of like what was happening. They were implying all these things. Obviously, the media is implying one side, but you don't really get his side, which was, I thought, interesting. Whose car was it? And then it was like, oh, his mom did get the car.
This is in the film. She went to a bank and basically said, LeBron James is my son, they're like, oh, okay, we'll give you a loan because you're going to be able to pay that back, no problem. So she legally traded in on his future value to get the car.
Right.
It turned out there was nothing illegal about that, but when he showed up in that car, the media spun it out of control. And I'll talk about that incident later, but I would have liked to hear him say, yeah, there was nothing wrong with that, and they blew that out of proportion. Or even his mom talk about that a little bit. James?
My general, I guess, quibble with the film is just my curiosity of what we're not seeing. And like you say, what LeBron James is not saying, what we're not seeing about his relationship with his mom or other things that are in the background. I mean, the elephant in the room is this film was executive produced by LeBron James. It's the first film his company did. So it made me wonder how different this film would have been if made by a neutral third-party objective filmmaker. What other stuff could we have seen that was more dramatic, more filled with tension?
What I can tell you is the film was almost in the can by the time it got to LeBron.
Okay.
It did start independently. And LeBron, because he was trying to get his way into film, agreed to be interviewed. And the conditions were, make me an executive producer, and I'm not going to talk about certain subjects. My other quibble with the film is there's sometimes some stylistic editing choices that were a little off to me. Some player character intros were done with quickly flashy cuts of that person in different poses, and that felt over the top and out of character. Point being, it's a good film. It's not a perfect film. There's some small things that I wish I'd done differently. Do you guys notice these little quibbles that I have, or do you have any of your own?
I really liked it stylistically with what they're doing with photos. I thought it was quite nice. If you're trying to do something unique with visuals, you're going to miss at some point, I feel like, especially if you're pushing the boundaries. And they went for it. So I was like, yeah, I'm on board with what they're trying to do. Overall, it succeeded. But yeah, I do agree. I do think that some of them were probably a little bit brought you out of the movie. I also felt the storytelling where it was kind of like blink and you'll miss it a little bit with certain characters. Like, I think I kind of spaced out during, is it Willis? Yeah, in his story with Chicago and his brother. I think I just spaced out for 30 seconds. And I was
that's on
I
you,
missed
man.
Everything. No, I'm just saying, but there's a lot of good stories. They've dropped in things throughout, but it was kind of if you missed that little chunk, then you missed everything you need to know about his story. Whereas in if in a lot of stories, it was if you miss some certain elements of LeBron's thing, you're not going to therefore lose the sense of who he is as a character because they have so many other nuggets throughout. But for those extraneous characters, it was kind of all right, here's your moment. We're going to talk about him and make sure you're in it because this is what you're going to have to remember for the rest of the movie anytime we talk about this character.
Cool. James.
Yeah, I agree with Willie McGee, and that's what I was referring to earlier about certain characters hooked me harder than others, and Willie McGee just kind of washed over me, and to a degree, Sean Cotton too. I mean, if you make a successful documentary about multiple characters, you want that final epilogue to have impact. When the text comes up and it tells you where are they now, you want to feel something for each of those statements. I didn't feel that much for Willie McGee and Sean Cotton went on to play football, and I was like, what? Okay, whatever. And I didn't really care. I don't think it's just them in real life, how interesting they are. The filmmakers could have been more interesting with how they highlighted whatever was cool about particular characters.
And obviously they're limited in scope, and they already were talking about character arcs being stretched thin. I think the extraneous, even more the extraneous, the bench players, there was this one white dude, I feel it was there for the whole time. It would have been worth even just a text thing, and also.
Why do you need to know about the white players all the time, Ryan?
Yeah. Not just them, but it's all the bench players who seem to be in the visuals. You're seeing all of them just one quick voiceover being oh, and also.
It's also possible, and I mean, both of you worked on documentaries before, that those people may have not signed off on certain things. There's rights issues potentially that may have hampered that. And it very well is likely to be a creative choice just to stay focused on the Fab Five. That white kid that you're talking about that wound up starting over Willie senior season, he wasn't part of the Fab Five. Don't say they disliked him. He just wasn't part of that group. You know what I mean? That was so impactful.
Yeah.
So guys, if you're down, I'm going to move on to the T word. You guys good?
Yeah.
It's time for your favorite part of the show, everybody. It is the T word. We start talking about the themes of the film. We call it the T word because Davey used to be afraid of the word themes. He hated this segment. He hated to dig deeper into the film, but we like to do it. We like to explore what the film is really about to us. This particular film, to me, is very much about friendship. In the annals of the greatest athletes in history, LeBron stands out as among few that have avoided the great fall. That might be, this China thing might be the opposite of that. But I mean, like, he's had certain little attacks and criticisms here and there, but all told, I think it's remarkable the way he's sculpted his life and his celebrity in a mostly positive way. Given his background, one could certainly see his story go in a different direction. Even great players like Kobe and Iverson had major issues taint their respective legacies. And Chamberlain would be another example. What this film shows me is that it's the support system created by his mother, obviously, but also these other four guys that helped keep LeBron not necessarily humble per se, but on the right course. In this film, they show senior night. While most of the players come out with their parents, LeBron came out with these four guys. I've always felt that those friends that you have, the really close ones, that inner circle, that is the family that you choose versus the family that you're given. This film details for me the potential of the power of those bonds to not only help us cope, but also to allow us to thrive, the way these two gentlemen here have done for me over the years. So guys, friendship in this film.
Yeah, friendship and teamwork. They go hand in hand. The collective over the individual.
But I mean, like, I think that what the film suggests is that their friendship made this team possible and better.
The chemistry off the court helped the chemistry on the court. Yeah.
Yeah, because right off the bat, freshman year, they're killing it because they know each other so intimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most effective, exciting plot points of the film is when LeBron can't play because of that controversy. And the team has to pull together, and we get an inspirational speech from the coach, which was really cool. And then they win without him. That was awesome. It's hard to script anything better than that. And also, probably one of the most effective character moments for LeBron was when they got across that no matter how troubled his home life was, he felt totally free and comfortable and like he was living his best life on that court. I thought at that point I got to know LeBron.
It seemed to me that those guys were a big part of that. Super talented as he was, his career and life could have gone a lot of different directions, but that unit was like a buffer almost. That made him handle a lot of those situations in a more mature fashion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely I think it's like almost a family at that point because you have the coach who is so clearly an integral part of them and their chemistry and like keeping them all glued together. And I mean, they talk about the Fab Four, but like you talk about other things with high chemistry like that are so successful, like the Beatles, for example, which is like this, when you had Brian Epstein being like the manager, keeping them all together, and Brian Epstein's death spelling like the beginning of the end of the Beatles. It was kind of one of these perfect storms for all the characters being together. And it's one of those rare moments where it's just this understanding, this deep level of understanding. And it just so happens they're all from the same hometown. The comparisons to the Beatles are very prevalent. Like, I think just because you have such a hometown, random people put together, they end up becoming like one of the greatest in the period in high school sports. And then obviously within music. To me, that's a big theme. I think that the title itself is kind of like what the filmmaker is going for. To me, it's like what a sport like basketball can do for the lives of certain people, how even just the most extraneous characters like went on to have these other things in their lives elevated just because of this one sport. And, you know, Romeo specifically says, without basketball, my life would have gone without this team. And obviously friendship's the part of that, but they're drawing it back to the sport.
And I've got a top 5 sports documentaries coming up, and a film I know that Ryan's seen is Hoop Dreams. And I feel like this is sort of a counterpoint to that. It's the friendship, the bond between these 4 or 5 guys that makes the difference between LeBron's story and William Gates' story, for example, or Arthur Agee's story in Hoop Dreams. And so I feel like this is the positive B-side of that record. Yes, there's basketball, but we've seen how amateur athletics and high school athletics can be damaging to a person's life and career and give them hope and then crush their dreams. This shows that there is possibilities. There is a positive hope. It doesn't have to necessarily go the way of some of those Hoop Dreams characters. James, have you seen Hoop Dreams?
Yeah, though it's been years. I'd love to revisit that film.
Well, I mean, you should do it before next week, because next week I've got a top 5 sports documentaries, and we'll see if this film or Hoop Dreams makes it a week from tonight. And Ryan will be there for that. I have one other theme, which is dealt with less in the film, and the reason is because of them choosing to tell the story mostly sequentially. it doesn't come until then. But once the film hits junior year of these players, it gives the film the opportunity to explore the media frenzy that surrounded LeBron once the nation started to take notice. So celebrity and media would be my other theme. And of course, the fallout of such attention on LeBron when the media try to take you down after lifting you up. And it's unclear to me whether it's the media that needs to take down heroes or they're feeding into a larger societal need for successful people to fail somehow. Either way, I think this film is a condemnation of that microscope, though I'm not sure it offers any solutions. In hindsight, the issues LeBron had in high school with the Hummer and the jerseys seem either very wrong, as we talked about earlier with the Hummer, or very petty. There might be some other racial issues at work here, but the film doesn't bother to get into that. Still, for me, it paints a very human picture of LeBron for me as that of an unusual survivor. Regardless of his talent, his story, like I said, could have gone in so many different directions, and he overcame the scrutiny in a more mature way than you might expect from someone his age. And so this film gave me a newfound respect for him. James, too, down there. What do you think about celebrity and media and how it's dealt with in this film?
Well, I think that theme, as you said, mainly has to do with LeBron's story, regarding.
Well, right. Yeah, as it would, because, because of the Sports Illustrated cover and so forth.
Yes. I'm glad I didn't spend too much time on it, but I think it was another color that made the film interesting about how you respond to that scrutiny and that criticism. I was glad to hear that judge ruling that the punishment was too harsh for LeBron.
He was given some vintage jerseys by like a local sports fan, like a guy who ran a sports store, and he just gave them to LeBron. And LeBron is 16 years old. It's like dope. I don't know if they said dope in 2002 and 3, but do they still say dope now? That's the big question. So he's like, okay, cool. Here's some jerseys. And he took them not knowing it was illegal. So, I mean, like, it seemed highly harsh to banish him for the season. The way the media portrayed that was that it was as LeBron as a villain. You know what I mean? The same way they portrayed him when he made the decision to go to Miami. He was a villain. It was like this media's effort to like take him down and make him into a bad guy because he's rich and famous and talented. But ultimately, it just fell on deaf ears because it's like, who cares? He was a free agent and he had a right to go wherever the heck he wanted to go. That's the whole point of free agency. Why are we constantly trying to crucify this man? That aspect of this film, and to your point, James, it wasn't a lot of time on it, but it did hit home for me.
The decision is its own thing. I mean, you have a guy that I think maybe from this experience in high school, like ends up going and he kind of manhandles his own media image from then on. LeBron is one of those few people that's writing his own history the way that he wants to write it. I always viewed LeBron as kind of a villain figure just based on who I was supporting. He's a very easy villain to watch. LeBron in particular, the media, the way that they perceived it and they showed the pressure. I feel like you felt the pressure that he was under. And you kind of saw how it's like, how does that not go to their heads when they're so young and they get this success? They literally felt like they were unstoppable, and they pretty much were, except for like a couple plays, like one bad game.
When you're so good at something, the consistent narrative is, oh, this team keeps winning. This player keeps dominating. The media, who wants to tell an interesting story, wants to find some flaws in you, to keep this story interesting.
Even the Sports Illustrated writer said that when he came on. He's like, you come in like waiting to nitpick.
Yeah, so you have a big target on your back.
You guys good to close things out and say farewell?
Yeah.
Yep.
Very exciting. And I normally don't do closing thoughts, but I do want to point out that yes, Ryan is not that short. I only picked on him because he's the shortest of all three of us. As a matter of fact, he's certainly not 4'10" like the third was. I forgot his name. Drew the third. So anyway, that's my disclaimer, and I just wanted to clean that up. Ryan, not that short. Do you guys have other closing thoughts before we say good night?
Well, I just want to know, after today, JB, are you going to call us the Fab Three?
That's right. This is your first show together. The Ryan and James are doing the show together for the first time.
True.
Let's see how the view count is on this episode.
How fab we are. Yeah.
Well,
exactly how fab you are.
Give you my closing thoughts are mine.
Oh,
that's my closing thoughts.
There you go. The view count's going to go up right there. And on that note, I'm going to close things out. Our next indie, we're going to continue our 2000 indies with our final one for this season. And everyone's been talking this year about the miniseries Chernobyl in the last few months. The Emmy-winning director of the HBO miniseries had a controversial indie film that hit the circuit in 2009. and that'll be our next indie for discussion in a few weeks. Our next show, however, is our classic movie discussion, which is coming up just on Thursday. It's the 1973 baseball film Bang the Drum Slowly. I'll have Devin and I think Patrick for that episode in just a few days. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, say goodbye to Maya, say goodbye to James, say goodbye to Ryan, and say goodbye to Dashel, or Dash for short, the new son of James. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.